Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly SEO. Today I have a guest from future. I have a guest from Australia. Hi Amanda, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm fine. It's a lovely Friday evening for me, but you're in the future.
I am. I am.
Yeah,
It's quite early on Saturday morning here for me.
yes. Thank you so much for being with us, although the hours is so late.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And we will have a really interesting topic today. Amanda will talk about enterprise SEO and stakeholder buy-in. And we can start in a few minutes. We are waiting for a few people to come. And how is the weather in Australia right now?
It's quite sunny, which is very nice because we've had a very rainy year. So the sun has been nice. So it's still strange to me having a summer Christmas.
Yeah, summer Christmas. I couldn't understand the concept when you said it first time, and yeah, it's interesting.
It is.
It's
It
yeah.
is.
So who is Amanda? Just tell about yourself. You can start if you want.
Yeah, sure. So I have been working in SEO since 2010, which makes me feel very old, makes me feel very dated.
Don't
But
feel
I've
like
been doing,
that. You look so young. Don't feel like that.
thank you. Um, and hello to who just joins. I can't see their name, but hello.
Hello,
But no, I've been
guys.
in SEO since 2010. And I was agency side for 8 years, then worked at a few different startups here in Australia, and then worked in-house at a major telco company in Australia, and was there for a number of years before deciding to go off on my own and start doing consulting for myself, technical and strategy. But for me, it's always really been about solving puzzles, which is what I think it is for a lot of SEOs, because things are always changing, right? It's always something new and something different, even if it's similar to something that you've seen before. But that's me. That's me in a nutshell. I'm based in Australia, though I grew up in the States.
Oh my God, it's really far away.
It
But
is far.
yeah,
To see my family, it's a 24-hour flight.
really long. When I was a kid, I always thought that the planes just fly vice versa instead of going the other route.
Yeah, sometimes they do. It's hello. Sometimes they do. It depends on the way the wind is traveling, honestly, I think.
I So welcome everyone, and we can share your screen if you want, but not like
Yep.
this. Sorry, or other like this. Sorry. Okay, now we are good. Oops.
Amazing. Um, so yes, today I'll be talking to you a bit about enterprise SEO and stakeholder buy-in. And sorry, let me just switch where my mouse is focusing. And just as a thing that we do here in Australia is that we acknowledge and pay our respect to the Indigenous cultures and traditional custodians of the land. So thank you. And we pay our respects. This land is not ours. We acknowledge that. But just briefly, what we'll go through, and I'll probably zoom through this, so bear with me. Chat through the foundations, stakeholder buy-in, talking to developers, which is always a fun one, always a bit difficult. Proof of concepts, and then the impact of changes, and how to kind of articulate that, bearing in mind enterprise stakeholders. And for me, I was in enterprise SEO for 3 years, but had worked with very large clients previously in my agency time. And the hardest thing about enterprise SEO isn't scale, in my opinion, but it's rather kind of the mindset that you need to have and how you manage the politics. Hello. Mindset, mainly because you need to really understand two things, right? You are a little cog in a much larger machine. And again, just kind of reminding yourself of scale a little bit as well. Changing the title tag on one page is really unlikely to move the needle. So if that's where you decide to put your foot down, it may not be the best way to start off an enterprise SEO engagement. And politics, because people are hard, particularly if they feel like you're threatening their job or questioning their authority or their knowledge. And SEOs a lot of times can be seen that way, because sometimes we have a very my way or the highway, very kind of black or white perspective on what needs to be done. And in enterprise SEO, there's a lot of gray, there's a lot of compromise, and there's a lot of finding the best solution for the business and for the business at this point in time. And it's always really important to remember at enterprise, very rarely is anything a simple ask or a low-hanging fruit. For the longest time, I wasn't able to directly change title tags or meta descriptions on my website. For example, I had to talk to my producers, and in order to talk to my producers, I had to talk to my PO, and my PO had to balance the work that we had already coming up and what we knew would be coming up. So very rarely is anything simple. But with stakeholder buy-in, I'm going to take a step back, right? And remind us that one of the first things about stakeholder buy-in is understanding the environment that the stakeholder is in. And one of the big things about that environment at an enterprise level is process, right? You really want to understand what your internal processes are and what those look like, and come armed with that knowledge before you even try and speak to your stakeholders, because you want to be able to talk to what your financial year structure looks like, or when your budget requests need to be in, or if there need to be quarterly reviews, or whether or not you need to go to a review board and have massive justifications for what you're proposing. Knowing all of that ahead of time before you speak to your stakeholders allows you to be much more prepared and provide a much more contextualized and personalized argument and conversation with your stakeholder, because really getting stakeholder buy-in is essentially lightly stalking them. You really want to understand what matters to them and how they operate. So you really want to get to know them as a person. And my biggest hint for this, and my biggest piece of advice for this, is that even when you start the conversation with your stakeholder, the conversation is never about you. It's always about the person that you're having the conversation with, because they are more important than you are, in all honesty. They have more sway. They can get things done. That's why they're your stakeholder. So you really want to make sure that you focus on them and their needs. And just something to remember in general. And I grew up in the United States on the East Coast, so I live in sarcasm, and I am quite a deeply sarcastic human being, but I absolutely recognize that sarcasm, 9 times out of 10, does not land the way that you want it to, particularly over email. So if you're working with a stakeholder and, you haven't worked with them for the last decade and know the ins and outs of all of their subtleties, don't be sarcastic. Like, just be boring. Write boring emails. Maybe have a dad joke in there, but don't add in that sarcasm. It could end up making or breaking your engagement and what it is that you're trying to get buy-in for. You also want to speak to their level, both technically and metaphorically, without punching down, right? You just want to mirror their language. And sometimes the best way to build a relationship is to ask for a small favor. And there are a lot of ways to get to know your stakeholder and kind of stalk them, right? As well as the business. You want to follow them on public socials. I don't know about in Europe or in the UK, but I know here in Australia, before we start any meeting, there's a solid 5 minutes of banter, small talk about the weather. Lean into it. Find out what their kid did over the weekend, or what their hobbies are, or what they're really passionate about. Find something that you can connect with them. Always try and ask questions rather than making statements, and learn about what they care about. Get to know them and their team and any personal assistants, and listen to how they talk. Hello. Do they focus on their competitors? Do they talk about their customer? Do they talk about revenue? Or are they obsessed with, what are they obsessed with? Because then that's how you want to frame your conversations. And then like I said at the beginning, you really want to make sure that you understand your in-house processes. How do you report on value internally? Do you use ROAS? Do you use revenue? Do you use profit, or customer lifetime value, or some weird, unique metric to the business? Learn your legal and other kind of regulatory processes, if they have any cheat sheets in terms of do's and don'ts. Get those from them. Same for the brand. Learn what your release cycles are for your dev team, for your website, for your products. Understand how work priorities are set. And then broaden out your kind of scope of conversation and kind of seep into other departments. Talk to brand team, your customer service team, your paid media team. And all of that will give you some really good insight into how to build your business cases and bring some fresh information into it. And I mentioned asking them to do a small favor. That is a bit of behavioral psychology, right? It's from Dale Carnegie. He wrote this book in the 1920s, so take it with a grain of salt. That's why Salt Bay is there. But one thing about people, and particularly about convincing people to do things, is you really want to understand empathy and leadership, as well as behavioral psychology. These are some of my favorite resources. They should have links in the PowerPoint, which I'll be publishing at some point in the near future. But really do keep this in mind. For example, post-purchase rationalization, right? We pretend that we make decisions logically, but we make them emotionally and justify them rationally. So when you're building any kind of business cases or business justification or talking to your stakeholders, you want to build a story, and then you want to make the numbers really easy. So what do I mean by that? I mean, base it off of something that your stakeholder can grab onto. So you want it very easy to understand. I appreciate that every once in a while, we all want to go really deep into spreadsheets and create some ridiculous forecasting model that takes into account as close to the 200 Google ranking factors as we can. But that is only a cool thing to us. That's only a cool thing to the SEO industry. Your stakeholders aren't going to be able to grasp that and hold on to it and hang their hat off of it. So you want to make it a really easily explainable metric, like, oh, the target conversion rate is based off of the highest peak season that we had last year, because we want that high to become our new normal, or whatever it may be. plain English, simple, something that they can hold on to. And this is something that I find get overlooked a lot of the time. And I had so much trust built in me when I was agency side as well as enterprise, because I got what I said I would get done by the time I said I would get it done. That reliability can be really difficult to find sometimes. So if you're the person that delivers on that, you'll be remembered. And to continue with that, right? Strip as much jargon as you can out of your language. Don't talk about link juice, talk about authority, talk about things that actually make you sound like an adult, and use metaphors. So going to the gym, going to the doctor, moving house. My favorite metaphor, one of my slightly secret weapons, is I explain Google's spidering and crawling of your website like a toddler on a sugar high. If you make it really easy for them and don't put any barriers up, they will tear through everything and find it all. But if you put something in their way, they'll fall backwards on their ass, have a tantrum, and not want to come back. And this is something when you're agency side, but also when you're internal, that you can run into, particularly when you're starting to build relationships. You can absolutely expand your stakeholder circle and the people that you're aware of and that you talk to. Ask to be introduced to as many people as possible, run training sessions, be curious. I won't go into this too much in depth because I'm realizing that we have much more to get through than the time that we have. So I will be brief, but generally the gist of this is that you really want to respect people's time by being organized, knowing what you're talking about and the feedback that you're trying to get from them, and actually anticipating the kind of questions that they have and answering them beforehand, and listening actively and having an open mind to their opinion and their experience, because you may be the SEO expert, but they are the expert in their job. And so they have exposure and opinion that you may not have, that you may not have considered. And it's silly to make the assumption that you know everything about what needs to be done because you've worked on a bunch of different websites. And I think educating gently, going back to what I said about people can get really up in arms if they think you're trying to question them or their knowledge or what it is that they do in their day-to-day job. So you want to look to try and educate gently and be curious about where they got the information that they kind of told back at you and whether or not it's actually valid. Be open to it. And I personally prefer one-on-one sessions or small department sessions because it allows people to be vulnerable, and there isn't a very high pressure environment. You're not in front of the rest of your team kind of trying to save face. So these are some ideas on how to kind of educate gently and build the broader awareness of SEO in your company or in the client that you're working with. And I've kind of hinted at the edges of it, but one of my biggest areas when I successfully get buy-in is proof of concept. And this is because it's essentially a shortcut to trust, because you're not coming to this person and saying, oh, hey, Google told us this thing, or this other agency did this other thing on a website that's entirely unrelated to ours and found these results. But you're taking instead a subset of your own website and saying, hey, I did this cheeky little thing and saw this result. I think this has legs, and I think that we can build it out. And it's kind of a built-in justification for budget or for requests, because you're saying, this happened on our website, and we saw the immediate impact of it. And when you're talking to developers, and even when you're talking to other stakeholders, one thing I always try and keep in mind is you're not there to decide on the solution, right? You're there to clearly articulate the problem and find ways to steer what a good solution looks like for everyone. So in some ways at enterprise, you are more kind of the product owner of SEO than you are an SEO expert. It's much more about kind of getting all of the right people in the room, making sure that everyone is clear on their requirements, and then sending everyone back out into the world with that context. And if this isn't something that you do already, talk to devs using their language, use Jira tickets and user stories. As an SEO, we want to have Google crawl our website so that we can get organic sales. And something to keep in mind in particular with talking to developers with enterprise level websites is that sitting down and combing through individual URLs of 1 million, 2 million URLs, if you're doing it by hand, isn't sustainable, right? So one of the areas there that you can build on that and get momentum more quickly is if you find patterns. And when finding patterns, if at all possible, and if serendipitously this happens, hopefully, that lines up into the different business units, right? Because usually that will be either different subdirectories or different subdomains, and those will be owned by different teams. So you'll have to have conversations with those stakeholders, but you'll have this handy little kind of pattern already set. And regular expressions, if it's not something that's already on your list to learn, if you're working with enterprise clients, really useful to learn because you're able to take what might have been otherwise 1,000 lines of one-to-one redirects into a single line of regular expression. Other kind of considerations with technical issues at scale, generally you want to assume it'll be difficult to get access to crawl logs. So you want to develop a hypothesis to fix the problem. Look at justifying proof of concept through case studies or competitor research. Talk to your developers, solicit them, and stroke their ego a bit. Say, look, I know I'm not an expert in Angular. This is what I've seen on the internet to potentially solve for this. What do you think of it? Because everyone likes to talk about themselves and their own expertise. So you want to have that active line of communication. You don't want to necessarily go to developers and say, you need to do this, but rather kind of, this is what I'm thinking. Because then that's also another behavioral psychology, right? Where if you get someone invested in building the thing, they're much more likely to buy into it later. That's actually called the IKEA effect. And for me, there's no one way to analyze at scale, right? I relied on time, proof of concepts, and Screaming Frog because I had yet to learn Python. I still haven't learned Python and SQL. So those are also opportunities, right? But they're not necessarily required to be successful in enterprise SEO. And of course, Hamlet Batista and his contributions to Python are definitely something to check out and something that's on my own list. And never underestimate being humble, right? Asking for help, being curious, asking questions. These are all things that may be a tough pill to swallow if you're used to being the absolute expert in SEO, but they're necessary to survive at a really large enterprise level. environment. And just to give you a bit of a flavor of kind of what I've seen and how I've done it. So I essentially created an entire hub. Excuse me, I need some water. I essentially created an entire content hub as a proof of concept for a larger implementation across the website. And that in and of itself had a 21% incremental increase in purchase when that content was a part of the journey. And so I actually sat down and did the writing. I did it because I had no writers that I could access. So I think one thing that a lot of people assume when going into enterprise is that you'll have all the people and all the resources that you need. Whereas in fact, a lot of times the reality is very different because the business has planned out their business and the growth of the business for the next 1, 3, 5 years. And each of those horizons has massive technical requirements most of the time. And the developers, rightfully so, are meant to be focused on those things. So adding anything new into that is a difficult conversation. So developers, writers, again, you never kind of want to assume that it's going to be easy because you work at a company that has 10, 100, however many thousands of people, that there will be someone that can help you write something or do a piece of code. It's probably going to be a bit of a battle, in all honesty. But if you're scrappy and actually have a bit of a startup mindset, there are ways to get this done. Industry case studies. If you don't use Search Pilot or Think with Google already, they're great, as well as all of the archives of Google's YouTube videos. Competitor research, the Wayback Machine, and archive.org is, I think, for a lot of people, a very underutilized resource. When you can peek into what your website looked like 5 years ago and what your competitor's website looked like 5 years ago, it's a very real way to say, oh, okay, between March and April in 2019, our competitor changed their website in this way. And then in June, they saw a massive uptick in organic traffic. So that kind of argument, again, it's very immediately accessible to stakeholders, right? It's not something that they need to think about. So it's really easy to build in that buy-in. And I always try and have multiple sources and have that proof of concept that I kind of sneakily did with the developer that I'm friends with and just got it done. And you always want to bring it back to what's important to the business, the strategic focus, how they talk about value. Make sure you have that emotion and the pre-yes, as well as the logic for the justification. But that is kind of my approach to stakeholder buy-in in a nutshell. And a few reminders, right? It's never about you. Learn as much as you can about what makes your main stakeholder and the business tick. Make no assumptions and always validate with the team member who's going to be doing the thing before you propose the thing. And get rid of your jargon. And proof of concepts may be your new BFF. And that's me. I'm Amanda. I've been doing this since 2010. I'm always product focused, always user focused, and I've done this a bit. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure if any came through on the feed.
By the way, if you have any questions, this is the best time to ask to Amanda. This was a really excellent presentation, Amanda. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I strongly believe that in enterprise SEO, we need to be patient, I guess, in order, because they are not like startups, and you need to wait for their comeback like months before they allocate their budget for SEO services and other things. So I can understand you. It's so
No,
hard.
absolutely. And I didn't include this in the presentation for whatever reason. I had a slide for it, but it must have gotten lost. Um, the quickest in that content project, the quickest that I was able to actually, from start to finish, create a piece of content was 5 weeks. And
Yes.
that was fast.
So this is not the topic of the presentation, but how about the reporting? Enterprise reporting. Is
Yeah,
it hard?
so we actually had an entire team that was dedicated to reporting. So I worked with them to build reports. And, but yes, balancing this kind of stakeholder management within the reporting sphere, yes, is difficult. And I can't say I ever fully got it correct. It's something that I'm still working on. There's um, a professor in the States who I actually just received a bunch of his books today, actually. But he is a master of visual hierarchy and kind of how to arrange things so that they make sense. A guy by the name of Edward Tuft. So if you're interested in data visualization, I'd suggest checking him out.
Yeah, as well as knowing SEO and knowing other things like Python, Jira, etc. But yeah, they are important. But database, understanding the data and sharing with the upper management is really hard. It's a really hard concept. I can understand you there. And you have to be simple, but you have to be interesting at the same time, because you're taking their time,
Yeah,
and you're trying to persuade them that they're going good, but it's really hard to persuade them. So I can understand. But that was really hard. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
it is. Um, has anyone dropped in any questions, or do you
Um,
have any more questions for me?
we don't have any questions right now, but
Sure.
I got my I got the best answers for my questions. Patience, waiting, and data visualization. So yeah, really unique and important. And I wish
Absolutely.
maybe in the future we have another session for reporting for the upper management and the enterprises. You,
Yeah,
if you
like
want,
I said,
yeah,
it's never something that I think I was perfect at. I'm always happy to share my process though.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I really wonder them. Thank you so much, Amanda, for this
Of
amazing
course.
presentation.
Thank
So
you.
I'm really thrilled to hear all of this stuff, and yeah, it was really insightful. So,
Good.
hi everyone again. I'm speaking again. Thank you so much for being with us today, and have a really, really, absolutely amazing weekend. Thank you, Amanda. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.